Thank you so much for joining me today. What a great panel. Everyone has their own expertise, but feel free to also answer as you see fit. Like we feel like there's a burning thing, and I need to add to this question. Feel free to do so. My first question is, why do you think this conversation is important right now? So anyone who wants to take that first question?
Well, so I'm also an educator, and I don't do well with silence. So I think but I'm working on it. So what I will share is that I think we all could agree that what happens at work doesn't just stay at work, like it spills over into the other parts of our lives. And I think the kind of reverse is true, right? What's going on in our personal lives impacts how we show up at work. And right now, we're just in this space, at least from the clients that I work with, where there is so much uncertainty, there's so much fear, there is just a lot going on right now. And it's really hard to walk into work kind of divorced of that, especially if you happen to be working in an organization that is being impacted by all of the changes that are happening. So for me to focus on wellness at this moment is to acknowledge just the lived realities that everyone is facing and to not ignore them. So I think sometimes we go into work and we're supposed to perform. You know, we're supposed to ignore these things because if it doesn't have anything to do with the bottom line or the work that needs to be done, it's not something we should be talking about. But it has to be at the core of how we're engaging with one another because it's there already. Even if we're not talking about it, it's there and it's impacting things.
Right. Rebecca.
Yeah. So echoing everything, we're all in each other's minds probably. There's a statistic that says, and I, come from the lens of incivility behavior at work, and there's a woman named Christina Porath, and she says that a person on the receiving end of one act of incivility spends the rest of their day thinking about it. And that's at work, that's taking it home, and you're taking those experiences out, and you're taking it to your family, your friends, and you're taking it out into the community, into the grocery store, as you're driving. And I think I have this interesting thought about work-life balance, and I think, we talk about it as a piece of wellness, but now that there's such a crossover of our home and work lives, it feels almost impossible. And that's why wellness, I see it as, really the goal. And being able to set boundaries and being able to be your best self at work allows you to come home and be your best self at home. And so, and I think just again, what India said, in the climate that we're in right now, there's so much ambiguity. There's so much, I think there's hostility out there. There's just, I'll say a lot going on. There's a lot going on. And I think it's so important for people to go to work and be thriving there.
Yeah. Kolby?
Life is stressful enough, and I think we can be able to choose our stress between 9 and 5. It makes things just a little easier. I think we talked about burnout earlier, and I'm of the Fast and the Furious generation, and burnout to me is when you apply a lot of energy to something and you don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, imagine if we could apply that energy to something and we got as far as we physically could as quickly as we could. And so I think it's important now as people are kind of being whiplashed back into a reality, kind of pre-COVID, of a little bit more of employer power, for better and for worse. How do we take the power back a bit and say, hey, like, I want to work, I want to contribute, but I want to do it in ways that I feel good about, I feel energy from, I feel proud of the value that I'm putting forth. And I'm not just a cog in somebody else's machine.
Erin?
I agree.
Yeah, right?
I also am a systems thinker, and I see that we are in a very volatile system, particularly since January 20th. And we are in late stage capitalism and existing in these very volatile, challenging times where I was just in DC last week leading a retreat for one of my clients. All staff came together, and it's DC, so a lot of the staff have been affected by the federal layoffs and firings and rehirings, and then we're seeing that across the board at companies too, with significant layoffs. And so all of this volatility, we also have caregivers, particularly in a significant mental health crisis. So at the systems level, we don't have the support we need. Collectively, caregivers especially do not have the support systems they need. And so it's up to us. It's up to us to take care of each other, to provide mutual aid to each other, because the systems are not going to save us. We are going to save us.
That's a really great segue to the next question. We talked about mental health earlier, and I think I read a data that 1 out of 5 Americans have mental illness, but only half of them gets treated, or at least getting consultation or therapists like that. So that's a huge number, right? What do you think are the stressors in the workplace that affects the mental health, and how do you think, I'm just going to do like 2 questions here. How can organizations support employees in terms of preventing burnout, which we saw cost a lot, billions of dollars?
I think it's coming together and figuring out what is the relationship. I think a lot of times employees go into work and saying, well, I got to do exactly what they say when they say it. If they say jump, I have to say how high. Because if I don't have a paycheck, I don't have health care, I don't have a well-being. But I think a lot of the burnout and that mental well-being is this, again, is doing work that we're not aligned with, is feeling a struggle and a hustle to do more, faster, cheaper. But I think if we really have these conversations where we can say, hey, what about this work energizes you? What about the challenges here actually get you excited? And how do we help you do more of that? Because I joke, I think the ultimate first world problem is to choose your stress. So if we let our employees do that more, imagine how much more involved and engaged they're going to be, how much more they're going to affect profit and costs and time and risk, versus keeping them in a box and not encouraging them to say, hey, this is how I think I can really add value here. I think that's a big change of saying, you're going to do this job, to how can we work together so that you are adding the most value, exercising your expertise and your genius.
Rebecca, I'm going to just go.
Yeah,
this is a very
absolutely.
important topic for us to kind of chime in.
Yeah. So I think I have 2 things. So one is, I think that there's a lot of little things that get swept under the rug, especially when it comes to behavior. And especially in this hybrid environment, people are behind screens, you're shooting off messages really quickly, and you're not thinking about your tone or how it's coming across. Maybe you're CCing someone else on it as a public humiliation, and it's that those behaviors it's easier to do behind a screen, but they add up. And I think a lot of times people don't speak up or address it when it is in that level of instability before it starts to permeate the entire environment. So I think, and that becomes stressful. You're maybe walking on eggshells, or feeling like you can't do anything right, or whatever the case may be. So I think that's one piece. The other thing that I see is that when we're talking about organizational culture, there's kind of these 3 foundations that have to synergize. You have individual behavior, you have leadership, and then you have the organizational behavior, and that's your infrastructure. And a lot of times they're contradictory to one another, right? So a great example, we worked with a PR firm, and they did a survey, and their employees were burnt out. They were stressed out. And so we worked with them on core values and worked with them on communicating work-life balance, communicating take your PTO. And then we were going through their infrastructure and their reward system. They had what's called the Go the Extra Mile award. And we're saying, so you're telling everyone to have work-life balance, take their PTO, but then in order to get rewarded, they have to essentially sacrifice for the company. They have to work at long hours, do whatever they can for the client. And so when those three foundations aren't working together, that becomes stressful because people don't know like Kolby said, what's expected of them. They don't know, they're stuck in this dissonance of, well, I'm supposed to have work-life balance, but then I want to get rewarded too. Which one do I pick? So that's, I think, a real big stressor.
Oh my gosh, I completely agree. I was sitting here thinking, you know, because there's so many examples of that. One of the things that, you know, what you said reminded me of was the message that we get about like stopping work, like, you know, don't overwork, like work ends at this time. And then you get emails from like your bosses or your managers at 11, right? And you're like, why am I getting this? Or you're getting a message, email that comes through at like 3 a.m. I've gotten those. It's like, why are you awake? And why are you emailing me, right? So I think that there's definitely this like disconnect between what we say and what we do. Another thing that comes up for me, to the point of the question, is often I find that stress exists when our workload doesn't match our capacity, and we're constantly given more and more kind of things to do, more work assignments, and no one is actually taking the time to like check in to make sure that folks have the capacity to do it. Like there's no kind of concern for how people are experiencing the work that they're doing, like what it looks like to have to produce what's being asked of them. So that, to me, speaks to really this like kind of lack of engagement that I often see from leadership, and just not being aware of what's going on, right? Like they think one thing is happening, they think this person should be kind of able to do this, but they don't have the full picture, right? They're just operating from one little kind of perspective, which is often a perspective that is uninformed and not engaged.
Really, really good. Anything
I like
about
going
mental
last.
health? Yeah. Well, we can start with you.
You
the
say
next-
all the
next.
things, and I'll say one more thing. For me, certainly a big stressor that I see in the organizations I work with and just holistically is change.
Yeah.
It's so constant. We are so fast moving collectively that if we aren't handling change as an organization, if we aren't teaching our leaders how to lead through change, because during times of change, employees experience 2.5 times more stress. And they're 3 times more likely to experience physical ailments. So all of a sudden, this change initiative that's supposed to be this great thing has all of your team incredibly stressed out, starting to feel unwell, and you're trying to make this big pivot. So one thing that can help with that, because the second question, how can organizations support employees in preventing burnout, is understanding, one, that change follows a predictable pattern. And if you teach how to lead through what you know that pattern follows, you're going to get different results. So beyond my work as a CEO of Trailblazing in Color, I also am a consultant for Franklin Covey, a global development company. And we teach the change model, and the way that we frame it is in 4 phases, and I'll rattle them off real quick, but I think it helps to understand the model. So we start with status quo. Things are normal, people know what to expect, they're comfortable. It's pretty comfortable at status quo because there's nothing unpredictable happening. And then we move into the zone of disruption. So something happens, things change, and now we're disrupted. The business is disrupted, but we are also disrupted emotionally, actually, in the work that we're doing. And from there, we get to this point of decision. Either are we going to commit to the change, or are we going to pivot because this disruption is just causing too much of that. And then we move, if we decide, yes, we want to go forward, then we move into adoption. Now we have to adopt new practices. We have to adopt new ways of approaching these situations. And if you go in with the mindset, this will change a little, but not holistically, or like not change the whole dynamic, we're not going to approach change proactively, predict, or just look at those obstacles that we may encounter. Finally, if all goes well and we think it's like this smooth line up, oh, the change is happening, everything's going to be better now. No, it looks like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, vice versa. Like, it's this messy line. But if we can get through that messy and understand it's going to be messy, we're going to fail, we're going to make mistakes. We've created an environment that allows for that supports that, then we can move into the final zone of innovation. And innovation is where those new ideas come from. We take what we've learned from going through this change, and now we're back to like, okay, what possibilities are open now that we've gone through this process? So when we think about how often change is happening, especially in response to things that are outside of our control, if we can get a handle on how we as an organization put standards of leadership around change, that goes a long way.
That's really, really good. I mean, all your answers, Micah, it's very, very insightful. And I would love to have a recap later on that strategy you just mentioned. So, as an individual, we need to be able to self-manage, right? And take care of ourselves. So, since also a big part of wellness is self-care, what do you think are the little things that you can do personally to take care of your mental health? So just to counter what you said about like the stressors and all of that, any tips? I could ask India and Kolby to give me 2 tips, and then.
Sure. Please.
Okay. So the one thing that comes to mind and I always talk to folks about is taking a joy break. So, I mean, of course, right? Like the joy person is going to tell you to take a joy break, right? I need to stay on message, on brand. But what really, because we live in this world where we're constantly, and I like fall victim to this, are getting these messages that tell us that we need to be on, we need to be productive. I forgot to do a LinkedIn post. Like we constantly need to be doing something, and we need to be available to people too. So much so that it comes at the expense of prioritizing the things that give us joy. So to me, a joy break is intentionally making time for the things that bring you joy. It is like saying no to the things that don't serve you, that are not even about you, and saying yes to practices that nourish you, practices that sustain you, and saying that no matter what, right, like I don't know how many hours of the day we're awake, I'm going to at least take 30 minutes out. Because if we start thinking about our days in terms of time blocks, and we start assigning those time blocks to who benefits from what we're doing, then often we realize that we didn't really get to benefit from many of those time blocks, right? Like my kid got something, then I like cooked dinner for other people, and by the time I got to it was cold. Like I didn't even benefit from that. So it's like, how are we making time for the things that bring us joy, and recognizing that that can come in small acts, right? Because the self-care industry is like multi-trillion-dollar industry, and it wants you to feel like you got to do something that can be posted on Instagram, that you can make a cute little video out of, and it tells us that we have to also take care of ourselves in a particular way. And I don't think that that's true. Like, I'm gonna take a nap after this, and that's my joy break, right? Like, caring for ourselves doesn't have to be big and extravagant. I would like, that's my top tip.
I love that practical advice, and I'd love to hear a man's perspective on self-care. Because I always interview women, but Kolby, would you enlighten us?
Yeah, I think there's the self-care, but I think it's also part of that is self-awareness and self-acknowledgement. A practice that I have that is going to come in a reminder in a couple hours at 11:55 every Friday. I write an email to myself, and it's a stats report. What are the 3 things that I'm proud of this week? What's the one thing I want to learn from this week? And 1 picture. And for me, it's this little thing that forces me to look at myself and my work to say, I did a good job this week. Because as you continue to be on and you're asked for more, and the demands only increase, it can feel like you're not doing enough. And unless you actually take the time, and I swear this only takes 5 minutes out of your entire week, to say, this is what I'm proud of this week. And the awesome thing is that on New Year's Eve, every year I get to look back at my notes on my phone and say, oh, I forgot about that. Or like, remember when that was like, remember that was the big lesson I learned that week or the big pain in my ass that month? And it's like, I can't believe it was that, or I can't believe I felt like it was that big. And so I think as human beings, we don't do enough time travel. And this can allow you to time travel back to your past, to acknowledge what you've done, acknowledge your growth, and give you a path of where you want to go forward.
I love that. I feel like I'm just beaming. Like, I really love that practice. And that it's not just you writing this and like, then I don't know where it goes. It like lives in the ethers or something. But that you come back to it, especially at New Year's Eve. Because I know like that's such a special time for me as I like am preparing to transition from like one year to the other. So just being able to like engage with the small moments, because by the end of the year, like we've forgotten all of those small things that got us to that place.
I don't know what I had for lunch on Monday, let alone what I was proud of 3 months ago. And so I'm not going to rely on my brain to give me credit. I have to record that somewhere. And I think we just don't do enough of it. Like we are so self-critical. And I think I would argue all of us in here are overachievers. That's why we're here today. And I think the plight of the overachiever is never thinking that you're doing or being enough. So give yourself a chance to contradict yourself for the good.
I love these personal tips. Do you write it on a journal or do you put it in a note?
No, it's in my phone.
Okay.
And it's just one continuous note, and it's just there, and it's fun to just kind of scroll through and remember, like, oh yeah, I forgot, like we played hooky that day and went to the baseball game, or like, I can't believe my kid was this little this long ago. Like, it's those kind of things that I think also in that moment give you perspective, not just in like, my life is okay, but like a year is a long time, right? Or like, remember when we thought we'd never get past this point in our lives. And so I think it plays with the permanency of life a little bit that I think we get stuck in. Either it's always going to be like this or it's never going to be like this. And so for me, at least, it's like, this too shall pass. So bear it or be grateful for it, because it's going to be gone eventually.
I love that. And I think if you don't like writing, take a picture. That's what I do. Like, so when I see it in my memories, I'm like, I'm like, oh, it really had, it gives you that dopamine hit, right? Like, I remember this. My kids are now grown, so every time I see their younger photos, it just brings me so much joy.
It's gonna make me look for my clothes. It's like, where that outfit at? Where that shirt at? I don't know if it's gonna bring me joy.
So let's now turn the conversation to the workplace and how we can apply these tools or practical tools, right, in the workplace. So the question is, what are some practical steps in the organizations, I'm looking at you, Sarah, that companies can take to create a wellness-centered workplace?
Sometimes I think the challenge with any new initiative or adjusted initiative is we get really excited, the owners of the initiative get really excited, and they do a lot of research, like what's cutting edge, what are other people doing? Oh, that looks cool, we could do that too, we should do that, and then you just jump right in without any actual intel on what your employees need and what are some of the chronic challenges that your company specifically is facing and what are the remedies and solutions to that. So first start with solving the right problem, rather than jumping in with a prescription to an ailment that we actually don't have. So I apply design thinking principles, particularly with regard to, well, like any systems change, because this is a systems change. Bringing more wellness into the workplace is a change of the system. So design thinking starts with empathizing with your audience. And so starting with surveying, focus groups, listening sessions, engaging with your leaders, learning about what their teams are going through, navigating, what are some of the challenges, and then taking that information and defining what the problem is so you have that clarity. And then jumping into, okay, what are some ideas, and then you pilot it and iterate over and over again. So the 4 principles of design thinking are that it's people-centered, you're solving the right problem. Everything is a system. Think about that. Everything is a system. India and I are a system.
Mhm.
Every relationship is a system, every team, every culture, every aspect of culture. So, and then finally, small and simple interventions. Small and simple, and try it and see what happens. And then iterate again, and then you just
Can you
keep
give
doing
like
it.
one example of that small thing that they can do? Or in your, maybe a real story or success story that you've seen?
Well, I really enjoyed, so I was mentioning how I was in DC last week leading a retreat for an organization that focuses on economic equity across communities. And they're based in DC, but they're a national organization. They have close to 85,000 members in their member network, and they are a small but mighty team of 28. And this small but mighty team of 28 has gone through it for the last year. They were an organization of about 75 in January of 2024, and hemorrhaging money, and no steady CFO, no one really paying attention or doing the things that needed to be done. So they had new leadership come in, and that leadership did a lot of things. And the organization was made much smaller, and people had to do more work. People have to own more things than they're used to. And so this retreat was an opportunity to bring people together, this new, smaller staff, with a very different clarity of what the organization is focused on and where they're headed strategically, what the vision is. So we previously to this session, I worked with the leadership team on redefining mission, vision, and organizational values, and defining the behaviors that come underneath of those values. So it's nice to have values, but if we're never talking about them, we don't know what they look like in action. Going the extra mile is an example of a no-no value. But what are we really trying to do here? So they landed on partnership, purpose, partnership, and innovation in that order. And so the work of the retreat was to bring everyone together and unveil this new way of working together. But before that, we surveyed everyone in the organization. We asked, what do you value in teammates and colleagues? What brought you to this organization? What do you care about in terms of how do we improve going forward? So everything that we ultimately unveiled in the retreat, I could point directly back to how they responded, the themes that we pulled out, and what we know that they all care about. So even though we were a little uncertain, like how are people going to feel about this? We've taken out racial equity and ethnic equity from the mission statement. It no longer includes these words that that are on banned lists. So it's about adapting, and it's about being really inclusive in the process, so that when you come and you say we've made these decisions, we can say truthfully, honestly, we made these decisions because of you and because of what you contributed as well. And here we are. So we got really good reception on that.
Thank you.
And so when I think about well-being, like it's that too. I feel connected to purpose. I feel connected to this organization and what they care about, and there's alignment.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That really resonates to me, and hope to all of you too. Rebecca, you work with toxic workplaces. So how do you do this? How do you turn this around?
Yeah. So I feel that, actually we use very similar process that Sarah just described. So surveying, essentially doing discovery, figuring out what's going on in the organization, and then building strategic plans around addressing those results. A lot of it is core value work and creating team agreements around behavior. I think to build on what Sarah has said, I think the first step when you're going into into a toxic work environment, when you're thinking about building wellness and a culture of well-being, is psychological safety. Without it, you're not going to get the feedback that you need to make change, or you're going to have employees that say, oh, wow, that was a great email, but it's never going to happen. But I'm not going to challenge it because I don't feel psychologically safe. There's no challenging. And there's not that ability to, I think, share when you're not feeling well. So really, I think about this all the time. When I first started at Civility Partners, we have a great culture. say that. Um, and I was getting my degree in human resources, and I was in my last set of finals. And I'll tell you, I had probably not showered for 3 days. I had a huge presentation, and I was working full time and going to school at night. And I came into work, and it was myself and our founder at that time. And I sat down, and it was it was so clear that I was a mess. It was so clear. But I just, I felt that I needed to come to work. I felt I needed to hold myself accountable. And I built such a good relationship with our founder. She sat down, she said, Rebecca, how are you doing? And I literally lost it.
Oh.
I just completely, I'm so stressed. There's this big presentation. She said, Rebecca, I want you to go home. I want you to take a shower.
First.
And I want you to focus on this big presentation. And I'll tell you that the next day I came into work, I felt so taken care of. I felt more committed to the company than I had before, which is saying something because I was already pretty committed. And I felt like a person. And I think about that a lot, that there's a lot of environments out there where where managers aren't taught how to create psychologically safe work environments where people can come to work as their full selves and to identify those kind of factors of when someone's not doing well. So I think in terms of how we change, I think Sarah's process is exactly what we do. And I think the first step, though, when you're going somewhere toxic is building psychological safety.
That's really great. And do you want to?
Well,
I have a question. I have a question for you, Kolby,
Sure.
that's related to that.
Okay.
So go ahead.
I've known Rebecca and the founder, Catherine, for I guess over a decade
Oh
now.
my God, so long.
Long time. And so as much as I know that Catherine does that for Rebecca, I also know that Rebecca does that for Catherine. And so I think it's the important thing is that if you can give it downstream, then as the leader, you can be vulnerable, you can ask for help. You don't have to put on this facade, this stoic, persona, that there's a bilateral emotional support system there so that there's no breakdown.
Which brings me to my question
Great.
about
Good
leadership.
job, Kolby.
So we know the importance of leadership, right, in creating change, and especially you were talking about well-being here. What do you think, or how does the leadership style impact that onto you?
I mean, I see it as a good leader is somebody who is going to remove obstacles for people to do their best work. Historically, this has been called the servant leader approach, which I love because it is your job to engage the genius of the people around you. They are not there to do work. They are there to express genius and to solve interesting and important problems for you. And I think as a leader, if you can make it your mission to equip your team with the right tools, whether that's technology, whether that's communication, whether that's emotional or mental tools, to allow them to do their job and to express their joy and passion the best, everybody wins. But we've all had, I would say that boss, but we've all had bosses who just like lobbing grenades into our day for some odd reason, who like to make our lives hard. And I think that's a great way to get disconnect, to get into stress. It's also a great way to have a revolving door of people underneath you who you have to invest in a lot of training and hand-holding and difficult conversations. So if you can go in and say, hey, I'm here to make, I think if both parties say, I'm here to make your life easier. Let me take the hard, let me take your garbage and I'll turn it into gold, and vice versa. That's an awesome bilateral relationship that I don't think anybody would want to leave.
Right. No. I think people leave people, not the work. Right. I've heard that phrase before. Sarah, in your work, how does leadership style influence well-being in the workplace?
I think the most important thing to know as a leader is that your leadership style is dependent on who you are leading. And so if we have this mindset of, that's just my style, that's just how I lead, and you can either get on board or find somewhere else. Ooh, that doesn't feel great. But this idea of really adapting to your team, learning to understand what they're motivated by, what stress looks like for what they look like when they're stressed, learning how they prefer to be communicated with. So I do a lot of training around communication and understanding different communication styles. Some people are very direct and quick and email them in bullets, and some people like all of the details and are very detail oriented. So everyone is different, and we need every style. If we have an entire team of direct, dominant individuals, how is work going to get done? It's going to be really challenging. So if we have all dominant leaders who have no interest in adapting and learning their team and how to adjust their style to their audience, I mean, that's a skill we need in every facet of our life. So I think it's just really centering on the adaptability piece is going to very much influence how I feel well at work and cared for at work if I understand that my leader really cares about me as a person and meeting my needs, because everybody has very different needs.
Absolutely.
I think too, the studies are all the studies are showing that people will leave.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing in all the studies. The Great Resignation is that the mentality that, well, you can,
treat me this way.
yeah, where you can, I'm the leader and I'm going to behave this way, and you can leave if you don't like it. People are leaving.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
Or worse, they're staying,
Yeah.
especially in this economy and
And
this
they
job
don't
market.
perform.
Quiet quitting is still happening. It's not going away. And so I think if you're going to treat your employees like crap and expect them to perform, you're going to be sorely mistaken.
Yeah.
So I think, they can leave, sure. But I think the worst case scenario is that they stay and just tolerate and perform at the very little level that you're going to hold them to.
Yeah, we know a lot of people like that in our lives, right? So this is a good question too for India and Rebecca. How can employees advocate for themselves, for their wellness, right? Their well-being. When we talk about wellness, I talk about the holistic, right? The mind, body, spirit, or if you want to be broad, like spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, emotional. That's a SPIRE method that I learned from Harvard. So how can employees advocate for their wellness, the whole being, right? If their workplace doesn't prioritize wellness or well-being, because we know that this is not yet a common thing. We're trying to bring it to the mainstream by doing this, but how can employees advocate for themselves? India.
So something I think about when I'm working with organizations, I think a lot about power, right? And the way that power kind of shows up at different levels. And so we often talk about leaders, right? The decision makers. And so for me, I think about it in three kind of categories. So we have decision makers, we have the influencers, and then we have the insight builders, which I think is what this question is getting to. So insight builders, maybe you don't have like any kind of like hierarchical power if we're looking at like an org structure. And so you can't just say like, we're gonna do this thing or implement new practices or bring programs. But the insight builders are the people who are experiencing the culture. They hear everything, they see everything, they know what's going on. And I think that space has such richness. And so I think that one is understand, like having that mindset, like for employees who are insight builders to know that, right? Like to know that they don't have to wait for someone to bestow some sort of power on them, but them in their roles as the folks who are understanding and seeing and experiencing the kind of culture of an organization, that in and of itself is a position of power, and stepping into that and owning that, I think is like the first thing. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, then we know that, oh, what I have to say is valuable. Like how I'm experiencing this is valuable, because you're so far up there that you don't even know that this is how, like what's happening down here with the rest of us. And so when there are those opportunities to share, like you all have been speaking about, putting that like sharing that information, giving that feedback is absolutely something that folks can do. And I hope that, that psychological safety has been established so folks can feel more kind of free to doing that. But then also just doing that even when you're afraid. And sometimes it's not just about what we're experiencing, but what we've seen other people experience. And so using those spaces, those feedback surveys as an opportunity to also speak on what you have seen other people experience, because they may not be in the space where they feel safe enough to share or desire, like they may be over it, like they've already quiet quit, they're like, I'm not responding to this damn email, right? So like, recognizing that that is a place for you to share, but also anytime, right? I think we also have to just get used to, and it's funny because Jessica reminded me that it's important to take up space. This morning I was going to sit somewhere else. I was like, oh, I don't want to like take that space. She's like, take space. And so I think too, our insight builders, we need to take space and we need to make sure that we're saying the things that need to be said and we're making the connections. Because sometimes, as I was saying, like leadership is just so disconnected and not engaged that they're not even making the connections when it comes to kind of wellness and what people need, or they're making assumptions, and we know the saying about assumptions, right? So being able to kind of share that information, I think is really important and something that folks can do in terms of what does it look like to intervene in a workplace. But again, it's also like self-preservation is not being selfish. And so often we need to turn towards ourselves too. What do we need to do to take care of ourselves? And sometimes that is leaving. And then sometimes that is not leaving because we can't. We need the job, whatever the case is. And so asking that question of what are the very basic things that I need to maintain and survive this place? And how can I find the resources to meet those, to get those?
Kolby, you work with,
People escaping.
Yeah. Now, you work with leaders at the same time you work with the employees looking for a career, new job. So what would you advise them?
You said earlier that if somebody has an uncivil experience at work, they think about it the rest of the day. Their brain space, their bandwidth is distracting them from their work. If you came to your boss and said, hey, my computer's broken, I can't work for the rest of the day, it would be fixed in 5 minutes.
What if you say that and then they expect you to fix it?
I mean, I think that's a sign. But I think it's also...
Call us.
Yeah. But I think it's...
So there's a tech support.
There's emotional
I know where you're
support,
going
for
here.
But I think kind of what Sarah was saying, for better and for worse, we live in a capitalist society. And so if you're looking to advocate for yourself and get your needs met, you have to speak their language. And leadership's language is money.
Bottom line.
It's data, it's money, right? So if you can say, hey, like, my boss is not allowing me to perform as well in this project as I want. And if I can't do that, then this company is going to lose X amount of money. Or, hey, like, you're making me stay late and come in early, and I'm not getting a ton of sleep. And like, here's the data of when we don't get sleep for X amount of days, right? So I think while we would hope that these people are proactively thinking in our best ways, we're all preserving humans. We are stick to our own bubble. And so in order to make your bubble big enough and sustainable for you have to make sure that people are empathizing with what you're experiencing. And the way that they talk is data and money. And so the more that you can speak their language, it actually brings you closer together. If you're asking for empathy, you got to give it first. And if their language is money, speak it first so they can speak your language of well-being and boundaries and work-life balance.
Kolby, to the point that you're making, what I also see is that the language is not getting sued. And so when you make connection,
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
that is like a big one.
Yeah.
My wife is a lawyer and we talk about this a lot, is when you start saying, well, listen, I mean, you could do that,
Oh.
but these are some outcomes
Right.
that could happen, one of which leads to you being sued. People start thinking about their decisions differently. Or like, yeah, I mean, you can have those type of reactions to people when you're talking to them. Or you could not, and then you won't get sued. Like, I think that too is actually, at least I have found to be really helpful. Like, what are the possibilities or the backlashes that you might face as a result of X, Y, and Z thing? And how can you kind of mitigate that? Is this money? And yeah, nobody wants
I
to
would
be
say
sued.
legal and money.
Legal
Or
and
great
money.
motivators.
Can I piggyback?
Rebecca,
Sorry.
yeah, Rebecca, I was gonna
So,
ask you.
yeah, just to go, I think the other thing that's becoming more apparent for recruiters is employer brand. There's so much out there. People, like you're talking about net promoter score and would you recommend this as a place to work? There's information overload out there in the world about organizations and how they function and the ability to share your experiences. And recruiting costs a lot of money. So they say, it costs about a third of someone's salary to replace them. There's your money right there. The second thing, when we're talking about behavior in the workplace and legal risk, is that bullying and harassment are the same behaviors. One is illegal, one is not. So when you're thinking about, you've done an investigation, for example, and well, it's not technically illegal, right? It can cross that line so quickly. So, we always say, if essentially the difference is if you bully everyone, you're good in the eyes of law. So I'm giving you guys a tip here there. Just bully everyone. If you are bullying and it's directed at a protected class, that is the only difference. And so I think there's a lot of, well, no, it's not technically illegal. We're not at risk. You are so still at risk. And I just have to say that. That's my story.
This is
Sticking
really
to it.
good.
Be an equal opportunity asshole.
Yeah.
This is a great segue again. I feel like we were all
It's
flowing
almost
here.
like you
Two
gave us
It's like
questions
we
in
did
advance.
It's like we've done this before. No, because we're about to go legal. I hope you're not recording now. So DEI is a hot topic right now in the workplace, and I know a lot of people or a lot of companies are being, protective of their company, their integrity, the legal ramifications. So they're taking things out of their website or rewording things or maybe even doing some training. So my question to our DEI experts in the room here, how does workplace wellness intersect with diversity, equity, and inclusion? I'm looking at you, India, as being our DEI expert, and you've done a lot of work here, right?
Yes, so I, before focusing solely on joy, did DEI work, and perhaps that's why I'm focusing solely on joy now. No, I still like it. I still love it, and also teach ethnic studies, critical gender studies. Right? So I'm also kind of coming at DEI from multiple kind of lenses, but what is important to me is that DEI is a lens, and it is a lens through which, if we're committed to it, we see all aspects of an organization as well as wellness. So to think about DEI and wellness, to me, it's one and of the same. Because if we have a lens of equity, if we have a lens that is oriented towards inclusion, then when we're thinking about wellness and what wellness looks like in our organizations, then we should already be attuned to the questions around inclusion. Do people have access to this? Is it what people need? I think you were kind of getting to this. Like, we just start, doing things. Why? Like, we're just like doing shit to do it, right? And it's like, is this actually what people need? And when we take DEI seriously, when we think about equity and we think about it seriously, then it is giving people the things that they need in order to be successful, in order to thrive. And at first, starts with understanding what it is that people need and what people want, to the points that you all have been making. Yeah, we're just like in this interesting space when it comes to DEI, and I'm just like personally disheartened by all of it. But at the same time, I'm also seeing so much wonderful kind of creativeness and innovation by organizations that are saying, we like, this is a core value of ours. This is the lens through which we look. So there is no like removing of something like that. It doesn't even make sense. Our entire organization, our ecosystem, like this is infused into our ecosystem. And so I'm seeing folks are being creative in their approaches to dealing with like real like budget cuts and like retaliation that exists today, and at the same time still holding with gentle care these values. And so I think I hope that answered the question.
Yes, absolutely. Sarah, on to you on the DEI and the workplace.
Yeah, India, so many.
Yeah.
I'm glad I have my little paper notes over here, and thinking about this idea that DEI is not a monolith, and when we begin to use it and prescribe it as a monolith, then we need to change our tactic. So when we hear people saying things like DEI hire, okay, well then that's not the language of the moment. We're going to change our language, because when we think about these terms at face value, the opposite of diversity is uniformity. Do organizations want uniformity? Do they want everybody to be the same and minimize where ideas come, innovation comes? No. Opposite of equity is inequity. Opposite of inclusion is exclusion. So when we look at the words, break them down, organizations don't want this, but now we've changed this term to something that no longer serves its original purpose. So we have to adapt our language to talk about it in a different way. Bottom line thinking. So when I talk about DEI, and I no longer say I'm a DEI consultant, I run a DEI organization, because I also don't. It's scaled out from that, but also I talk about it in terms of respect, trust. When trust is high, speed goes up, costs go down. We did it. That's it. That's DEI.
Yeah.
So how do we build organizations of high trust, and how do we be ninjas when it comes to bringing DEI initiatives into organizations where they don't even know they're doing it? I was a DEI consultant in 2020 and the subsequent years after, and I'm sure India also knows, like, we were getting calls all the time, and they were from a place of minimization, meaning like we think we need this and we're gonna just do it. Like, how do I, like, working with diverse populations, what does that mean for your organization? Bring us training on how do we work with different people from different backgrounds. What?
Help us check the
What
box.
not to say. Tell me what not to
How do
say.
we not do microaggressions?
So on to Rebecca and Kolby. Any tips on how wellness initiatives can be inclusive or accessible to all?
Yeah, I think I have one thought, and then I think also Sarah and India should probably add to this. But I think that, I talked about those three foundations of culture, and there's still ways to, especially in the organizational processes and procedures, to build inclusion into your policies, flexibility, work from home, like all of those things that you can look at your policies and how you function as an organization and say, are we being inclusive? And thinking about your population. So I think I saw a lot in 2020. There was, we're really focused on DEI. We're really focused. So there was a lot of leadership communication about it, but not a lot of actual systems change. There was a lot of training, which anyone who knows that training is just one blip in time. It provides tools, but you have to be in a system that supports those tools to actually get something from that training. So that's my thought, is really focusing on those systems.
Yes, yes, and yes.
Yes.
I think, and not to be the downer capitalist, but I think you have to go to leadership and say, like, this is actually a profit-driving initiative. Like, if our board, if our leadership is all white males, but we're trying to sell to minority women, there's going to be a disconnect here, right? Or if we're trying to bring in innovation and intelligence and life and world perspective in our lower ranks of our company to bring up, those people have to see themselves here through other people who are living and walking the same life. And so I don't think, DEI is, for me, it's baffling. I'm sure I'm not alone here, but it's like, why would you not want to sell to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And that includes, yes, your customers, but also maybe your most important customers are the people that are working for you. And so I think if you're getting pushback or you're trying to spread this message out, going back to the data and the money, right? If we want the best and the brightest to come here, it's rare the best or brightest are always going to be white males. And so, this is talking as one. So I think if you can have that in there, it's a profit-driving mechanism. And for me, it's baffling. I can't really speak to it more than that. It makes no logical or business sense. I get why people are emotionally threatened by it, but we're not a culture of a lot of emotion. It's mainly money, unfortunately. So I don't, the backlash is illogical, but if you need to get illogical people to think logically, tell them how these initiatives are actually going to drive them dollars in their pockets.
Thank you so much. And as we conclude this panel, I have two more questions, so I'll give you a minute each to answer. What trends do you see coming or happening in the workplace in terms of well-being, wellness, and all of that? Like tips or things you've seen that worked, just a minute or two.
I think if things don't change, it's going to get real ugly really fast. Because the job market isn't great, because you can't, great resign anymore, people are staying. And we talked about, you guys had you're doing a customer right now, or a client right now that had a strike in their busy season of all their integral operational workers. And because there's no collaboration and cohesion, there's gonna be combat in some way or another. And unless we decide to meet in the middle together, it's gonna get ugly, and I'm afraid.
Rebecca.
Yeah, and I think, and I mentioned this, I think, I can't remember, I was talking to someone individually, or maybe I mentioned it and blacked out on this panel, is that there has, trends-wise, is the rise of incivility. Those little, and I hate to say little because they're all impactful, those behaviors are seeping in now more than ever. And I think based on, kind of the world climate, there's less accountability around it, and there's almost been permission given to behave that way. And the continuance of the hybrid, hiding behind the screens, sending, having to respond quickly and not really thinking about the way that you are communicating, I think is gonna become more prevalent. And now more than ever, it's important to really speak up when you witness or experience maybe someone saying an inappropriate joke or gossip. Gossip is a killer, and because it's happening and it's increasing.
India.
Yes to all of this, right? And like all the bad things that are happening are just going to keep happening. But what I am perhaps kind of hopeful for in terms of a trend is people are attempting to be proactive, and they're thinking about what do we need to do right now to just help folks, because people are aware that all of this is happening. And they're like, what can we do to do something about it, to help to like mitigate the impacts within our control. That's a trend, and I see this happening in all kind of facets, this kind of desire to be proactive and to implement kind of changes, implement programs I am working with a client that has started this like critical conversation series, right? And really getting people to talk and relate to one another more. So that's a trend, and I hope that it continues.
Yeah, no, I see that too. We are booking speakers for webinars because, a lot of companies, it's the most cost effective and also low hanging fruit, very accessible. So I think those little things help too. And then, of course, I love retreats. So, yeah. So, how about you? Trends that you've seen in your work and the work that you do?
Well, I will share quickly. I was talking to Amsel, thank you, who's a mindset coach. Before this, we were having a conversation and I wrote something down that you said, which was the quality of your life is the quality of your standards. And if we replaced life with company, the quality of your company is the quality of your standards. So good,
Yeah,
so
it is.
spot on, because when I think about trends, the clients that are doing well for their organization financially as well as on the people side are the ones that know we have got to define standards, we've got to make them so clear. So when I say standards, I think company values, those behaviors that lie underneath those values, a very clear driving mission and work that aligns, and we have a clear decision-making process about that too. So even when change comes, we can stay centered. And so I think that is a positive trend, that people are knowing like these words can't just be these fluffy things on our website anymore, nor can they be on our careers page hidden. Like only when people think about coming to work for us will they sort of know who we are, but we can't even say what our values are. So really that idea of turning them into the standards.
That's really
Thanks,
great.
Amsel.
Thank you so much. We would like to take questions from the audience at this point. If you have one or two. Yes, Christina, I saw your hand
Is
first.
someone else talking? Okay.
No, are you first?
So, I mean, this is great stuff. I love what every single one of you has said so far. So what
But
you're
who do you
looking at,
like
we're
the
looking at
most?
Who's your favorite?
so far. This is an ethic of care that you're describing here. And so it really comes down to care of the individual here. But you also mentioned, privacy issues and so forth. But this is such a shift. It's not the traditional mechanistic hierarchical organization. So how do you, when a lot of people go into the workforce, they're expecting tradition and they're expecting this, top-down sort of thing, and that's not what you're promoting. How do you shift perception to employees that that's not how we play the game here?
Anyone want to take that?
I have a thought for people entering the company is your onboarding program. I think people mistake onboarding for orientation around the job, but onboarding is telling people how it is around here. It's setting expectations, and everyone should be involved in it. It's not just HR. It should be their manager. It should be their teams. If you have a small organization, it should be the entire organization that's involved. A really great way to kind of vamp your onboarding for that is a buddy program, and that is long-standing teaching about the ways of the company.
Not to one-up you, but I think you can.
How dare
I think, hiring, right? Employer branding, right? Are we hiring people to do jobs or are we hiring people to solve problems? And I think if you're hiring people to do jobs, they're going to be really good order takers. They're going to fall into the hierarchy of boss said do this, then boss said do this, then employee does it, right? And so I think if you go in and saying, hey, this is a meeting of the minds. We are problem havers. You as the candidate is our problem solver. How do we work together? And then I think it's then reinforced in the community and the culture and the expectation as you ramp up, so that you're not continually falling into this place of cog.
So we're both right.
Yeah.
Any other? Susan, I see your hand too.
So you talk about employer and employee relationship, but what about those situations where it's a co-working space? How does that concept apply? That's pretty much.
I used to run a co-working space.
Oh.
Go, Sarah, go. So I can talk about it. I think it's that orientation, onboarding as well, is what can you expect? What do you have to look forward to in terms of our offerings, but also how do we behave? How do we treat each other? What are our values? So I'd say it's the same. And then I dealt with, conflict too, and had to have crucial conversations along the way. So having that articulated and being able to hold people accountable to, well, hey, this is our agreement, even in this space. And so you're not adhering to our agreements, and there are consequences. There are positive consequences if you do, and negative if you don't.
One more question, and then yes.
So I heard you talk about caregiving. My world is around caring for mama, caring for caregivers, and I'm just curious what you're seeing in the work you're doing, how companies are or are not shifting to thinking about how to care for the employees that need, and I'm talking, moms and parents, yes, and caregivers, because you could be in the sandwich generation like me and taking care of both ends of the spectrum. I was squeezed out, for lots of reasons in the corporate world. So I'm just wondering if you're seeing any shifts in that, like more supportive direction, or if it's just this blind space still and just hoping that people will conform and find their own very expensive childcare.
Yeah, you're a mom.
Well, I can add some thoughts, but then yes,
And
to Sarah. I don't feel like I am seeing the type of movement that I would love to see. Like, I think it's still an area in which the company or the clients that I work with that are doing well at it because the employees are kind of requiring that and demanding that. But if there was no one who was speaking up and saying, this is what I need, this is my experience, then it wouldn't be happening. And that's what I see happening, at least at a number of other organizations. But another question was directed to you. So,
well, just because you mentioned caregiving, but for anyone's experience. Yeah.
I will say that I'm also a mom, and I feel like I am an entrepreneur in large part because I'm a mom. I'm a single parent, and there are so many ways that my life would not work right now without me being in this role. And that sucks. Yeah. Super sucks. Because life design, we are really robbed of that as caregivers when it comes to the support of our organizations. I got to speak on a panel a couple of weeks ago for Lawyers Club San Diego in honor of International Women's Day, particularly around Family Leave Act, the legality and what we're seeing trends-wise, which is why I was brought in terms of organizations. And it's not good. I see it more with women-led organizations, that they have more inclusive policies. Fortunately, a lot of law firms actually provide paid leave for anywhere from 3 to 9 months is what I heard when we surveyed the audience in the room, but they are the outlier, not the rule. Mm-hmm. And so I am not seeing a lot of good shifts there unless there is women leadership on the team.
So opportunity, right?
Opportunity.
Change.
Yeah.
Okay, one last, and then we're gonna wrap.
A lot of questions, but I come from a world of caregiving, and I come from a world of working in an environment of a small corporate or small private CPA firm, orthopedic surgeon, and I am a person that gives my all, because genuinely I'm a caregiver, and that's what was my heart, right? To just put yourself out there, and I put myself last, but I'm happy to do it because it kind of keeps me going. But coming from a world of a CPA where I'm a runner too, so I voice what I feel and I do it respectfully, but acknowledgement has always been tough because I think I did too much. So I run from when I speak up, relationships, with family, with work, with anything, because I protect myself. So I built that. I'm realizing now I get nervous speaking. It's the first time ever being in a place like this. I'm afraid to speak up, but when I do, it's respectfully, and then it's acknowledged, but then it's like, I see that corporate world where it's like, I can very connected with the CEOs, but there's always an individual that kind of brings the home life into work. And it's taken into the person, like, it shows, it shows where they behave in a certain way where you're like, why is that coming back to me if I give my all, with an email, with like, so I tend to like just stay quiet and then I'm looked for like, hey, you know what, because your body gets stiff, I noticed I would get ill, like, why am I not being able to show up to work? I need the money. I'm a single parent. I was a stay-at-home mom for 17 years, built my home, got a divorce because I knew, like, I think about the now. So I think about the moment and acting on the moment. And then when things don't shift to where you're acknowledged or compensated for your efforts in such way, not only financially, like with money, but just emotionally and walking in there and saying, I don't want to fix everybody's problems today. It's like, I'm here too. So I come from that world of running from men, women, anybody that wants to hide my individual self or not, even a simple acknowledgement. Hey, you guys did that. Or you get acknowledged and then all the work is put on you because you can take care of it. I can handle it. I can do it. I'm trying to find ways to figure it out. But this is why I'm here now. I feel because every single experience I'm here, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I've never put myself in a place like this. Because I'm like in a box, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm comfortable with. It fills my heart, I'm thriving. But the caregiving aspect, I can't let that go. I can't let that go because that's where I've been nurtured emotionally. Where in the corporate world, I have to nurture everybody else. So that's where I'm like, okay, this is, so it brings me to, I've done cosmetology. I try to find that, right? Got pregnant on birth control, all that. So I seek education to be able to educate based on my life experiences. And I found, through that, I found my system that works for me completely. It has changed me to be able to be here and put myself in a situation where I don't have a career. I got my divorce and I still have a great relationship with my ex because that's my mindset. I'm gonna change all, my cultural change that I have. It's a big thing, like you talked about that earlier, and it's really big when you're the black sheep of the family, firstborn female, raised with a bunch of men. It's you become, very like guarded. But I seek that side of, which is this, developing a wellness, mental state of mind, connect with your body and your true self in a work environment.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a
So
lot to take
I
in,
appreciate
but-
you sharing and being vulnerable in front of a bunch of strangers.
Mhm.
What I'm hearing here is you're trying to shift away from escape and more into ownership.
Ownership, I want to, and then obviously with something that is, it goes with mental well-being, like,
Sure.
and physical, because it shows up in your body with time.
So you mentioned here, firstborn, female, minority, right? And a lot of people I deal with, overachiever, right? And like I said earlier, we don't give ourselves enough credit. And so we can talk later, but shifting into a place of, instead of looking at how much more you need to do, taking ownership of how much you've already done.
Right.
And making sure people like are aware of that. And doing it in a way that is not like, hey, look at me, I'm amazing. It's about, hey, like, how have I been able to help you? What is the impact I've been able to have? What is that worth to you in an emotional toll and in business toll? Because hard work doesn't get rewarded. When you raise your hand, you get rewarded. And so I think it's about having enough self-confidence to say, when I raise my hand, I know what the F I'm doing.
And I've done that, and I've walked away, and I get calls back from every job that I walk away from, because I voice.
So if the pattern is telling you that you're good enough, what's preventing you from doing it more?
So there's an opportunity to do one-on-one after the panel
Sure.
or during
Yeah,
the
yeah.
lunchtime. And I'm sorry because
No, we gotta
we're
get
cutting
moving.
into someone's time, but I want to end this amazing panel with a word of advice. One word, one sentence, and starting from Sarah.
All right. One word, one sentence.
Or two.
One question.
Or one
Just
question.
From this
Yeah.
conversation that we're having, when it comes to being courageous, because this work of pushing in and saying we're going to do things differently, it takes a lot of courage. A question that helps me is, who can I be a better role model for? Because if we are driven by helping others, sometimes we need that reframe in our mind to help ourselves too.
I want to like take a pause there and like, who do I want to be a role model for? That's a really good question. India.
Okay, so my kind of takeaway thing would be to focus on getting 1% better. Because we talk about this and we might start to measure our companies or measure ourselves up against this kind of ideal standard, and you see how far away from the goalpost you are and all the work you need to do. But really focusing on how can we make manageable, sustainable change comes at just moving one step. And so what can you do to get one step closer to where you want to be?
I love that. I heard that 1% a day is equal to 37% improvement. I don't know the math in that, but I will double check. Because I thought it's 365 days, right? Better. But she said 37%. I forgot the book, but I will research. But do you have an idea?
No, I know. I'm like, I did not say I teach math. No idea.
Rebecca.
I think my couple sentences here is we tend to minimize a lot and say, oh, that's not a big deal. And I think my phrase is make it a big deal.
I think what we're talking about here is courage and standing up to power and giving the finger to the man, literally and figuratively. And I think when we shrink back into our comfort zone, what prevents us from doing more is, I think, asking ourselves two questions. One, what is the worst case scenario of this? And then how can I prevent that from happening but still taking the action? I think what I do for my clients is I get to help them live in fear today so they don't have regret tomorrow. And I would challenge, I say that to all of you, but there's also a mirror in front of me to saying that to myself. And so that would be my challenge to everybody.
Thank you so much for this.